variables are declared and assigned, and the different data types and operators in the second section. In section 3, we'll focus on data structures and look at arrays, objects, maps and sets. In section 4, we'll see how we can control program execution and take a look at the conditional logic involving if, switch and ternary statements. We'll also cover loops and iterators here. Section 5 will see us move on to some more practical aspects of JavaScript, like how to work with the different types of data and some of the built-in APIs like JSON and math. We'll also see how to work with dates and times. Functions are one of the most used parts of the language, as well as one of the most useful, so section 6 will focus entirely on them. We'll look at some essential function concepts like scope, closures, prototypes, and the this keyword, and we'll see how to work with different types of functions, including arrow functions and generator functions. In section 7, we'll look at a collection of different but widely used features of the language, like Ajax, promises, destructuring assignment, regular expressions, and classes. Section 8 will focus exclusively on working with the DOM, and the final section, section 9, will look at some of the more common web APIs, like the selector API, geolocation, web storage, and web workers. Don't worry if you've never written a single line of JavaScript before. By the end of the course, you'll be able to work with the language to leverage its strengths and steer clear of its weaknesses. And don't worry if you don't know any other programming languages at all. All concepts required to understand JavaScript will be explained in full. We've got a lot of material to get through, so let's move on to the next lesson and get set up ready for the coding examples. In this lesson, we're going to get a basic development area set up, ready to work through the various coding examples that I'll be showing you throughout the course. During the course, we'll be using a variety of JavaScript versions. It will be a mixture of mostly ES5 and ES 2015, but will also include some newer features such as ES modules. ES 2015 is now largely supported in most modern mainstream browsers, but ES modules do not have as much support yet. For this reason, it's still best to use a transpiler to convert the latest JavaScript into a previous version of JavaScript that will be understood by a wider number of browsers. For this course, I've chosen to use System.js with the Babel plugin because it's extremely simple to set up and requires very little configuration. The repository for this course is set up to use System.js out of the box, and while we won't need it till later in the course, we can go ahead and clone the repository at this point. You'll need to have the latest stable version of Node.js installed, as well as the Git version control system. So if you don't have these already, head on over to nodejs.org and git-scm.com and follow the installation instructions for your platform. So to start with then, we can clone the repository, which we can do on the command line. You can get the URL of the repository from GitHub. Once the clone is complete, which basically just means that the repository has been copied from GitHub down to your local computer, we will then need to run npm install to install the project's dependencies. npm is the package manager for Node.js and allows us to install many useful packages for JavaScript development. Once this command is finished, everything should be ready to use. Let's just take a quick look at what you'll get in the project directory once you've cloned the repository. There are a couple of files there for Git, the git ignore, license and readme.md files, and there are some npm files as well, the package.json and the package-lock.json files. We can ignore these. They aren't related to the course material at all and just contain meta information for Git and npm. There is a config.js file which contains a small amount of configuration for System.js. We won't need to make any changes to this throughout the course, and again, this can largely be ignored. There is also a very basic HTML file called index.html. This file loads System.js and the configuration file and tells System.js to load a file called index.js. This index.js file is our playground and is where I'll be adding most of the different examples that we'll work on. There is another branch in the repository which contains individual files for each of the different lessons throughout the course, just to separate out the various coding examples that we're going to be looking at. These are in a branch called completed-course, and you can look at these at your own leisure. Let's just open up the index.js file. It should contain just the useStrict directive and a console.log statement. We'll be looking at strict mode in more detail later in the course. The console.log statement just writes a message to the browser's console, but it can be very useful for debugging purposes, and we'll be seeing it a lot throughout the course. As well as System.js, the project also uses a tool called BrowserSync, which allows us to run a local web server, and again this is very useful for development purposes and is a very common practice in JavaScript development. We can run BrowserSync by running the command npm run serve from the command line. We'll first need to move into the directory that we've just cloned. We can then use BrowserSync by running the npm run serve command. So this command should open up your default browser and load the index.html file from the repository in the browser. And I'm just going to open up the console now. And in the console there you can see the working message that came from the console.log statement back in the index.js file. One feature of BrowserSync is that it automatically watches our files and refreshes the browser whenever we save a file. So if we go back to the index.js file now, and let's just change the console.log statement. When we go back to the browser, we should find that it has refreshed itself automatically and updated the log message. Great.